How does this painting make you feel? How about this one? Or this one? A couple years ago, the knee-jerk reaction of most would have been some form of apathy. Without recognizing and having an opinion on the artist, the casual viewer may consider these paintings not worth discussing. Art more at home in a hospital or on a jigsaw puzzle than hanging in a gallery or selling for thousands of dollars. In 2025, a likely reaction would be to assume that they were AI generated. There's a particular sheen in the art of Thomas Kinkade that calls to mind the art churned out by Midjourney and ChatGPT, the all-too flawless surfaces and dissociative blurry edges. One of these paintings is a Thomas Kinkade original, and one is an AI copy of his style. Can you tell which is which? Maybe you can, but maybe not for long. AI art tends to dovetail with Kinkade's subject matter as well as his style. The bots on Facebook that automatically generate thousands of meaningless slop JPEGs tend to learn that people react well to wholesome and lighthearted topics, as do the bots on Facebook that write meaningless slop comments to perpetuate the cycle. Thomas Kinkade discovered long before the inception of generative AI that playing off people's longing for a cozy time and place that never really existed is a quick way to the top, and manipulating their faith in both Christianity and the art industry is a quick way into their wallets. Anyone with a passing knowledge of Thomas Kinkade has already heard the usual complaints about his art. Quoting solely from the small-scale survey I hosted on Reddit, too sugary for my taste. The subject matter is chintzy. He was to old ladies as was Lisa Frank to prepubescent girls. Atrocious work, insipid and pandering. Why on earth would you waste your time with him? And, of course, looks like AI. Some of the most common criticisms of Kinkade's art involve words like twee, quaint, and kitsch. Even some comments I received praising Kinkade's talent acknowledged this element of his compositions. I would not consider his work groundbreaking art, wrote one commenter, but Kinkade dared to create paintings that made people feel happy. Another commenter called the paintings calm and peaceful, a concise summary of all that anyone finds enjoyable about them. None of the surprisingly numerous pro-Kinkade comments I received were under any illusions about his originality or his moral standing as a person. They seemed to simply enjoy his paintings at face value. These commenters fall on the other end of the spectrum from those who will curse Kinkade's paintings just for existing, a small yet vocally overblown group whose opinions were explored thoroughly in the Thomas Kinkade deconstruction by YouTuber Solar Sands. In a recent two-part episode on Kinkade, the podcast Behind the Bastards discussed the history of the self-styled Painter of Light trademark, from his humble beginnings to his religious awakening to the rise of his self-destructive gallery empire to his eventual death by morbid alcoholism. In discussing Kinkade's early years, the hosts of Behind the Bastards bring up the 1983 animated fantasy film Fire and Ice, for which Kinkade supplied some of the background art prior to his solo career. They make the point that his art in the film isn't as noticeably garish as his standalone paintings, which may just need the attention of someone else's work to complement them. This suggestion from Behind the Bastards reminded me of an entirely different video by Solar Sands, his essay on liminal spaces, in which he displays the background images of Lego set packaging, eerily familiar to the casual consumer, but clearly missing a central tenet of its composition. While Kinkade's kitschy paintings weren't intended to act as background filler for mostly nude barbarian cartoons or cardboard boxes of colorful ABS bricks, there is nonetheless something integral missing in his art, something indescribable, something spiritual, whose absence can never be covered by any amount of gaudy colors or heavenly light. For those who have studied Thomas Kinkade as a person, and not just a merchandise generator, it seems tragically apparent that whatever was missing in the art was also missing in the artist. In his cautiously scathing write-up on Thomas Kinkade, film critic A.S. Hamra pokes fun at the painter's mawkish self-produced biopic, noting that the film inadvertently acts as a mask-off Freudian slip from the Painter of Light trademark. Community only goes so far, Hamra claims is the hidden message. Art is money in the bank. Had Thomas Kinkade's Christmas Cottage been helmed by writers and producers with no loyalty or legal obligation to the multimillionaire painter, this message may have been included with full intent. The movie depicts what would colloquially be referred to as Kinkade's origin story, the moment in his past where the now undying painter learned to focus his efforts on nothing more artistic than gaining vast amounts of capital and vast amounts of infamy. Recalling his trip to Kinkade's hometown gallery in Placerville, California, Hamra describes a Kinkade original selling for $150,000 and explains that Kinkade has managed to, quote, find a way to make sentimentalists pay for emotion in monthly installments. This high price is not unusual given that the painting was an original. Kinkade almost exclusively sold reproductions of his work, marketing them as art for the everyman while still selling them for thousands of dollars apiece. These reproductions were produced en masse thanks to a team of well-trained and artistically minded Hewlett-Packard DesignJet 5500 UV inkjet printers. Kinkade's business model centered around the uniquely dubious practice of hiring professional painters, called master highlighters, to add small details to these prints, making them technically unique. True Kinkade enthusiasts could even shell out for a Master's Edition print, which would be touched up by Kinkade himself and signed with ink containing his blood. At odds with the melodramatic Christmas-themed schlock of Kinkade's direct-to-video glory story, Thomas Kinkade never seemed to express much appreciation for the family or hometown that were presented as the driving force of his mounting success. Despite citing his mother's poverty as the source of his inspiration, Kinkade and his partners did nothing but manipulate the penniless masses into buying artificially expensive copies of artificially beloved paintings. Even with all the expansive merchandise and printing options available through Kinkade's company, the painter's own beloved mother wouldn't have been able to afford a coffee mug. Speaking of the legendary Kinkade glow, the unrealistically bright reflection spilling through every window, door, and crevice of Kinkade's painted cottages, Hamra notes that the light was, according to Kinkade himself, what he had wished to see coming home instead of the cold and empty house of a single mother working third shift. But given Kinkade's apparent disregard for those who grew up in similar situations, Hamra asks the somewhat disturbing question, didn't he maybe just want to burn the place down? Is his art really a form of arson? Despite his humble upbringing, Kinkade displayed no respect for those of a similar origin, aside from the occasional token donation to an optically preferable charity, or to centers of imperialist entities whose work engages more with spreading ideology than charity. The Kinkade Studios website names the White House and the Vatican alongside its charitable donations, and his ultimate net worth was built off the simple tactic of tricking his most devoted fans into thinking his art was a good financial investment. Regardless of the buyer's opinions on the art itself, they were led to believe that a history of appreciating value implied nothing but soaring prices for Kinkade prints. They would appreciate so much, in fact, that one would be wise to license their own Thomas Kinkade franchise, assuming all the financial risk for the opportunity to run a gallery selling glorified photocopies of glorified postcards, the sale of which would of course include kickbacks to the man himself. Unsurprisingly, the history and future of rising value had been entirely fabricated by Kinkade and his cronies, who were able to manipulate the cost of his prints with impunity thanks to their ability to start and stop the printers at will and arbitrarily designate random prints as high value or limited editions. While marketing himself as the underdog of the elitist art world, Kinkade would offer financing for purchases of his prints, backed by Wells Fargo, $0 down, according to Hamra, an all too familiar method of making an unattainable purchase affordable through the consensual slavery of debt. Kinkade spent the 90s building an empire out of these locally owned galleries, using the money, labor, and devotion of his fans to flip simulations of art, digitally reproduce paintings with artificially inflated prices. In 1994, he took his company Media Arts Group public on the NASDAQ. In 1998, its stocks hit a $25 high. At the height of Kinkade's success, his 40-in assembly line produced 10,000 prints a month, mass regurgitated by computer printers and superficially added to by master highlighters. The highlighted prints would sell for around $1,500, while the master's editions, still a print but highlighted by Kinkade himself and signed with his blood, could sell for 10 times that. Like any other type of merchandise, Kinkade's paintings were mass-produced and shipped out to retailers, but unlike your average car dealership or gift shop, the employees of Kinkade's galleries had put their lives on the line to work there, and were required by the mother company to promote their products as a smart financial investment, parroting the lie that they had fallen for. Perhaps no more evidence is needed to understand Kinkade's purely financial goals than his continuous insistence of the latter. On the website of Thomas Kinkade Studios, registered trademark, which continues to mass-produce paintings for grossly inflated prices 13 years after the painter's death, Kinkade's short biography insists over and over in the same breath that his true goal in life was painting straight from the heart and sharing the light, that he uses his paints in support of hospitals, schools, and humanitarian relief, and that he hoped his artwork would be a messenger of hope and inspiration to others. Surely a man who donated to the Salvation Army, Hurricane Katrina relief, and St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital couldn't be motivated purely by financial gain. Thomas Kinkade wanted to make money. This is not a secret. In the increasingly neoliberal, late-stage capitalist world of the 21st century, even the most serene and egalitarian artists can be forgiven for needing their work to turn a profit. On a completely unrelated note, if you want to support the channel and you're already subscribed, I have a Patreon with ad-free videos and access to my novels, which are also available on Amazon for only $1 a month. My goal is to never do any paid sponsorships on Rico Talks, so any support from you guys goes a long way. But Kinkade didn't just pay his mortgage and make some spending money on the side. At his death, he was worth $70 million, and his company broke $4 billion in profit that same year. That's not to say Kinkade's enterprise didn't slouch after their high point in the late 90s. By 2002, the stock of Media Arts Group had fallen to $3 a share, and franchise owners were getting antsy. While galleries were required to sell lithographic prints for $2.95 apiece, Kinkade liquidated his overflow stock for significantly less, resulting in furious customers trying to return their products to independent franchises. To some, this looked like an intentional devaluing of the entire brand, which suspiciously led into Kinkade's 2004 purchase of Media Arts Group. For a measly $32.7 million, Kinkade regained the full rights to his life's work, and with it, the souls of the franchise owners. Nearly everyone involved with the no longer public Media Arts Group felt ripped off, and some in more ways than financial. Kinkade had been an inspiration for the faithful, an evangelical conduit for the good and the pure. Though he remained this figure to many people, those who had lost money had also lost the scales over their eyes. Most of my clients got involved with Kinkade because it was presented as a religious opportunity, said the prosecutor who brought 24 individual cases and 2 class action lawsuits against Kinkade. Being defrauded is awful enough, but doing it in the name of God is really despicable. For the rest of his life, Kinkade continued to swindle those who had cast their lots with him, while mounting personal issues led him deeper into alcoholism and a hedonistic lifestyle, which included routine appearances at strip clubs and at least one serious accusation of sexual harassment, culminating in his wife's permanent departure. Gallery owners began to sue Media Arts Group left and right, some being awarded millions of dollars for their failed businesses. Kinkade won a few of these cases, but that didn't stop the FBI from opening a file on his alleged racketeering in 2006. As the recession of the late aughts continued, the company that handled Media Arts' printing process filed for bankruptcy and began outsourcing its work. In 2012, after a long up-and-down struggle with sobriety, Kinkade overdosed on Valium and alcohol. Tom believed that he should be able to control it, said his brother, and that led to his downfall. He had 6 months of sobriety, and then suddenly you get a message. Tom's had a beer. 2 days later, he's into vodka. 7 days later, he's dead. According to his girlfriend, who immediately embarked on a public war with his ex-wife,
Amy Pinto Walsh, Kinkade's girlfriend at the time of his death, went to court this week with 2 letters she claims Kinkade wrote before his death.
Kinkade, quote, died in his sleep, very happy, in the house he built, with the paintings he loved, and the woman he loved. 13 years after his death, Thomas Kinkade still releases mass quantities of greeting card art at exorbitant prices. The quality and production haven't changed, but the subjects are a little less universal, and a little less empty, than before the Painter of Light trademark ascended into corporate immortality. The majority of products listed on thomaskinkade.com aren't unbranded cabins or small towns that could be anywhere. They're mostly crammed in every corner with instantly recognizable characters and objects whose inclusion was foreshadowed years ago, when then CEO of Media Arts Group Ron Ford claimed that his future plans for the company could be compared to the early days of Walt Disney. In a similar vein, Kinkade himself claimed that he could easily do anything that Walt Disney had done. And before his death, he unwittingly set himself down this promised path, leading to a legacy intertwined with that of another man, also dead, also unspeakably profitable. Thomas Kinkade's Snow White Discovers the Cottage couldn't be mistaken for an original interpretation of the Brothers Grimm story of old. The eponymous character appears fully in her most recognizable incarnation with the yellow skirt, blue top, and red cape of Walt Disney's 1937 classic Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This visually branded version of a public domain character stands amidst a low-effort simulacrum of the film's events, rendered in Kinkade's traditional light and fluffy style, with Snow White herself seeming almost photoshopped into this ubiquitous and long overdone scene. The cottage isn't untouched by Kinkade's personal flair either. The Kinkade glow emanates from every window, despite being unoccupied, and one has to wonder how the seven dwarves will feel when they come home from the mine and discover their home engulfed by the inferno of Thomas Kinkade's emotional repression. Snow White Discovers the Cottage was not an isolated event. In his later years, Kinkade was hired by Disney to produce a number of paintings, most of them hardly different from his usual fare, aside from the inclusion of classic Disney characters, most of them, like Kinkade's paintings, a uniquely marketable reflection of an idea owned by no individual or company. Nor was Kinkade's deal with the omnipotent House of Mouse restricted by his own lifetime. On the home screen of the current website, below a rotating gallery of licensed pop culture imagery, the viewer is prompted to choose their preferred genre of painting between Disney, Star Wars, Marvel, Harry Potter, and DC. Selecting a random page among these options reveals a mediocre painting of Rey, the protagonist of the Star Wars sequel trilogy, titled Original Study, Rey, trademark, of Hope, by Thomas Kinkade Studios, 28 inches by 42 inches. Under a banner suggesting a one-on-one with a professional art consultant, the painting's description gives a lengthy rundown of the events of Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. After Rey, trademark, and Kylo Ren, trademark, defeat Supreme Leader Snoke's, trademark, elite Praetorian Guards, trademark, aboard the Supremacy, trademark, Rey flees in Snoke's escape shuttle to meet up with Chewbacca, trademark, to search for General Leia, trademark, Finn, trademark, and the Resistance. This goes on for a while. The Last Jedi premiered 5 years after Thomas Kinkade died. No indication is given on the website as to who actually painted this middle school-esque portrait of Daisy Ridley in a colorless environment. In fact, an entire Meet the Artist section is dedicated to Kinkade himself, maintaining the illusion that his talent has transcended such a simple impediment as death, and that the man himself lives on in spirit through his company, his website, and his brand deals. The painting of Rey is listed at $15,000, but with payment plans starting at $1,354 a month, backed by a firm. The partnership of Thomas Kinkade and Walt Disney, granting a dead painter access to all the creations of a dead media businessman, seems in hindsight like an inevitable merging of similar legacies. Both men are dead. Both men continue to produce mass-marketed slop bearing their signature. At least in Disney's case, the diversity of the brand allows 1 or 2 decent movies or TV shows to slip through in between the relentless onslaught of branding and merchandise and movies based on brands and merchandise. Aside from his visible arrogance and self-righteousness, Kinkade must have believed on some level that as long as he kept his focus on painting, he was still more of a man than a brand. As long as his overpriced coffee mugs and postcards were marked with his cheery landscapes instead of some palatable cartoon character, he was accomplishing his ostensible life's goal of spreading love and faith through art. Kinkade expressed this feeling of superiority over his immortal business partner in a manner as eloquent and mature as one would expect from him, when he urinated on a Winnie the Pooh statue outside the Disneyland Hotel, drunkenly declaring, "This one's for you, Walt." Darth Vader and Doctor Strange may seem like a far cry from the quaint cottage scenes of Kinkade's original style, but the advent of AI art bots has shown us that uplifting scenes that bleed patriotism and Christian faith are as irresistible to a certain demographic as billion-dollar franchises are to another. Much like Walt Disney himself, the insatiable greed of Thomas Kinkade has allowed him to transcend death beyond just leaving himself a legacy. Like any good villain, Kinkade has achieved immortality, but not in the corporeal sense. He has become the one thing that can never truly die as long as nothing fundamental changes about our culture or economy: a brand. Kinkade lives on through his apprentices and through their mass-produced works of branding that advertise not only themselves, continuing to enforce the idea that anyone actually wants these paintings and haven't just been gaslit into thinking they do, but also serve to advertise that which needs no advertisement, the multi-hundred-billion-dollar conglomerate that has slowly assimilated everything general audiences learn to love on their own without being ordered to do so. Thomas Kinkade and Walt Disney are a match made in heaven, two brands with the names and faces of men who subsist and thrive by burning down, with extreme prejudice, the very consumers they rely on to maintain their immortality. At the root of everything, Thomas Kinkade wanted something worthwhile to fill his dark and empty home. He tried pure heavenly light, but succeeded only in burning down his own mythology. He tried drugs and promiscuity, and ended up dead at 54. Only now, years after his death, has the ethereal remnant of Kinkade discovered that the empty space in his paintings could never be filled, only covered up, preferably by money-printing slop characters that are likewise searching for a way into every avenue of productivity, from Funko Pops to fine art. The Disney characters are money, and while it can never fill the emptiness of a soul crying out for fulfillment, money is the most universal band-aid fix. A lump of clay supporting the hole in a heart, like Walt Disney's two-dimensional characters filling the emotional cavern in Thomas Kinkade's paintings.